When you speak of finding your will to get over your fear, to find your addiction, if someone's in fear, where do they start to develop that will? What are the steps to starting to develop that will?
Yep, that's a very good question. Because the reality is, for most people, if we're in this emotion of fear, it's highly unlikely we'll even have any will to even look at the fear. And that is our problem. That is a problem, that is a very large problem for many people. I feel that it all gets down to desire for a loving relationship with God and your soulmate in the end. To me, that's what drives every decision I make. So I have such a strong desire to be in a loving relationship with God and my soulmate that I'm willing to go through every fear that it takes to go through in order to engage those relationships. Does that make sense? Now, when I began this process again in this life, it was about, I was 33 years old, so it's 18 years ago, right? I started this process at 33. And at that time, I would have preferred to die than engage my will to find any fear. And that was the reality. I would have preferred to avoid everything. So the question becomes, how do you get from that state, where you just rather not deal with anything, into starting to wanting to develop this desire to have a relationship with God and your soulmate? And I had to go through some personal experiences that the law of attraction brought to me through my condition. My soul condition was one of, I want to shut down everything. And the law of attraction, of course, brought me a whole series of experiences. And for me, this is what it took. So here's my life. This is all that AJ's life. What it took was that I had to lose all my friends. Lose all friends. I had to lose my family. Had to lose my religion. Had to lose my job. Had to lose my children. And I almost had to get to the point where I lost my life. And then I realised that there was something wrong. Now, I suggest to you not to wait that long, but this is what happened to me before I developed my will in a more positive direction. Does that make sense? And I lost all of these things, and I eventually was living by myself, and nobody wanted to be in my life. Now, my children were convinced to not be in my life from other people, but still, in the end, it felt like I lost them, right? And so forth. But many of these things happened through an event, and they all happened at the same time, pretty much. So I got to this point where I was desperate. And it was only when I was desperate that I decided to use my will to examine the reason why I got into this place of desperation. Now, why did it need so much to happen for me to get into that state where I was willing to examine? It was because of how big my fear was. So usually the bigger your fear, the more has to happen negatively before you will actually engage your will in a positive direction. Now, if somebody had come along to me before then, before this time when I lost all of these things, and said to me, you know, you need to use your will in a more positive direction, I would have said to him, what do you mean? I reckon I'm using my will in a positive direction as it is. Does that make sense? I would have told him that I felt convinced that he didn't know what he was talking about. And as a result of that, because I wouldn't have listened to him, I had to go through these experiences before I got to use my will in a more positive direction. Now, what I realise now after that experience is this. I could have been open to listening to somebody. In fact, before this time occurred, there were people in my life who said to me that certain things weren't right. And what did I do? I just ignored them, right? I had time after time when I could have listened to somebody and then decided to actually engage my will at that point rather than at the point of losing everything. But I didn't. And so I had to get to the point where I was quite low before I realised that there was a problem. Now, we can choose to make this choice at any time, but we often don't. We only choose to make it when our life becomes too painful. That's when we make the choice. And that's sad, really, in a way, isn't it? That many of us have to get to be in a lot of pain before we make a different choice. Do you find that sad? Like, it's sad that it has to be that way, but it's a measure of our own resistance, which is a measure of how much fear we have. If I had, before that time, sat down and wrote down all of my fears, like if I'd just done that one thing, just made myself a fear list, right? I would have been more conscious of my fears, and it's highly likely that I would have began to use my will to start to feel some of them, right? But I wanted to remain unconscious of all of my fears. In fact, what I used to do, as I've described in some other seminars, I used to, before the next day occurred, I would write down every potential possible problem that I could foresee in the next day occurring based on my plan for that day. And I'd write them down. And then I would write down every action I would take to avoid those particular things occurring in that day. And so the next day I was completely prepared for the day by having all these fears already all turned into what I would think of possible problems, and then coming up with possible solutions that I would actually also write down so that I knew what to do should that problem occur. Right? And I used to live a lot of my life that way. If somebody said to me, "Hey Jay, that's all about control. That's all about your fears. And what you need to do is make a fear list at least and start looking at your fears and feel them." And if I was convinced enough by that person to do that, I probably would have avoided losing a lot of these things. Now, some of these things, of course, I needed to lose. In fact, I feel pretty much all of those I definitely needed to lose. Except for perhaps that one. But in the end, I also needed to lose those to go through specific emotions. And in the end, I look back on it now and I go, okay, that's what I needed to have to get to the point where I was willing to face my problems. If I had been more engaging of life and more engaging of my true desires, I would have found that place earlier in my life. That's reality. But I was too afraid to do that. So what happened finished up happening. But if you're a person now listening to this, I would be going, okay, rather than doing that, let's assume that I must have a lot more fear than I think I do. And let's start to have a look at what those fears might be. And let's start developing a desire to feel them rather than waiting until it gets to such a terrible time in my life that I have to. Now, my personal experience has been that I've had to basically do that with the majority of my emotions. I've had to get to the point where my experience was so bad that I had to look at my fear. And so I'm not afraid of that process now. Like, I know that's the process that God's got me in, that every time I ignore a fear, I'm going to attract events which occur, which will trigger this fear. And as long as I'm sensitive and see that and feel that fear will disappear and my life will change. So I know that now. So I'm not afraid of engaging my life and having fears come up anymore, as I used to be. So like somebody from the UK says, we want you to come over and do a television show or program with us. I go, yeah, no worries. And I know there's a high likelihood that I'll be made fun of, in public, that there'll be millions of people watching and they'll all think I'm an idiot, right? But I don't avoid it anymore, even though I might be afraid of it. So the best way to address it, I feel, is to allow yourself to take control of this process of getting to know your fears better and already looking at the ones that you've got going on in your life. And the only way you can really do that is by addressing some of your addictions. So one of the things I did once I realised what needed to happen is I got rid of all my addictions. So my job was an addiction, so I got rid of that. It was an addiction. I was working 120 hours a week on the average, so got rid of that. I had 4 vehicles, so I got rid of all of them, and I rode around on a push bike. I had, at the time, I had 13 properties, and I had a lot of funds coming in and out, having to manage, that was taking up all my time, and I decided to sell all the properties. Of course, based on my addictions of fear about money, they only sold when I was in dire straits. So in other words, when I was behind my payments to the bank, by 50 or 60 grand, then I'd sell a property and pay that all off. And then it would only happen to trigger more fears, right? I had fears about all these things. So I had to work through them and allow myself to work through them. But I chose to get rid of all my addictions. That's one of the best things you could do for yourself if you want to address your fears.
May I recap my take of what you said then?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have your fears, it's good to list them in the fact that you'll know what your fears are, become more aware of them.
Yes, because you want to create awareness.
Yeah. When you're speaking about controlling all of that, that's not necessarily helpful because then it's a way of avoiding it.
Of course.
So you want to, even though you're scared, go ahead and take a leap of faith. Step forward.
Do what you are afraid of.
Okay. And then...
As long as that thing is loving. Okay. Does that make sense? So if you want to have sex with 25 different people, I'd suggest that's not very loving. I wouldn't do that, even if it's what you're afraid of. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And then what I was thinking of as far as something to guide you with, to have a guiding point so that when you're in fear, you just don't get lost in the darkness. Would it be accurate to say is to keep in mind the desire to connect with God? Because that's what I find very easy, is to get lost once the fear really kicks in, just to get lost and have no guiding, no lighthouse to guide by.
Anger is your guide. Every time you're angry, it's telling you you're afraid of something. So anger's your guide. Does that make sense? So when you say get lost in your fear, you're now talking about detunement from fear. Like a person who gets lost in their fear lives in their fear. And that is an angry position, actually, to choose to live in your fear. Do you understand why? No? Does anyone understand why it would be an angry position? When we're afraid, what do we want? Remember I said, what does fear do? It suppresses our will. What is will going to do? Motivate us to action. Is that not true? Okay. Every time we get lost in fear, it's because we're refusing to act. Does that make sense to everyone? We're refusing to act. So, for example, your best friend is married. Her husband cheats on her. She's your best friend. You know about it. She doesn't. She believes her husband's a nice, loving man, that they've got the best of relationship. You believe that if you tell her, she'll get angry with you. She won't even believe you. Right? What do? If you're living in your fear, you know what you'll do? Nothing. You won't act. You won't act in harmony with love or truth. You won't act in harmony with humility. You won't allow yourself to go through the emotion of losing your friend, if that's what's going to happen. even. You won't do it. You won't act. So every time we're living in our fear, not acting, it's because we're not acting. It's because we're refusing to choose to live a life based on these things. In other words, we're refusing to take action about those things. Every time we refuse action, we are basically going to consign ourselves to being in the fear place for the rest of the time that we choose to not act. And sometimes that's years, sometimes that's hundreds of years. There's been many spirits for which that's thousands of years. There are many relationships on this planet where the husband and wife know they don't love each other, right? Why don't they leave? Because they're refusing to act. They don't want to act. They're angry. They don't even have to act. Right? They refuse to take a choice, and the reason why they're refusing to take a choice is because they're afraid of something. Right? Every time you get embroiled in your fear and you sort of feel locked up in your fear, it's because you're refusing action. Action that's in harmony with these principles. You're refusing to take it every time. And I've found that one of the best ways to get rid of fear is always choose to act in harmony with these things. Even when you're terrified, act in harmony with one of these things. Does that make sense? And your fear, if you're humble, it will just come out of you, you'll experience it, and it will go. It will disappear. But if you don't do that, you can stay in this fear place where you're always there, every time you think of that thing, you're always worried, you're always concerned, nothing changes, and you actually finish up having your fear dominate your existence. So what I feel is the fourth thing. So anger is your guide, telling you every time you're afraid. And the fourth thing is take loving action. Don't refuse to take loving action. Does that make sense? If we go right up the back, or maybe to Mary, you want to say something about it? Yep, so leave it, Mary, and right up the back there.
I just wanted to add to that third point, because I relate to this idea of getting very lost in fear. And I've learned to recognise not just anger as a guide to my fear, but also confusion is always an indication to me that I'm avoiding a fear. I don't want to acknowledge or recognise a fear, so I get confused. Doubt is exactly the same. It's always when I don't want to face the possibilities in front of me. I'm afraid of facing them, so I just sit in doubt, like it's a choice, like it's a real emotion, and it's not. And also, hopelessness is often a choice that I take to avoid fear. So I just go, it's all hopeless, instead of recognising there's actually a fear that I don't want to confront. So I just thought that might be helpful to add to that list, because
And if you think of the hopeless emotion, it's really an angry emotion. You want to be hopeless, you don't want to have to take an action. If you think of confusion helps you to stop taking actions, right? That's the whole reason for it. We get all confused. Oh, I don't have to do anything now. Doubt is the same. Oh, I've got doubts. No, I don't want to do it now. So it's all about being angry about taking actions in the end. Yeah.